Beedrill is one of the most iconic and recognizable bug types in the Pokemon franchise. This is a great example of the elegant simplicity of Pokemon designs from Gen 1. At a glance, this Pokemon looks like it'd be pretty strong, and a nice reward for investing time into your Weedle. But unfortunately, both in-game and on the competitive side of things, Beedrill has very little to offer. The early game bug types aren't designed to be very powerful, but I've always thought there was a huge dissonance between Beedrill's awesome looking visual design and its power level in-game. Even among the overall quite bad selection of early game bug types, Beedrill really fails to stand out in any notable way. The main Pokemon metagame I play is Gen 3 OU, and recently on a live stream someone requested that I try and win with Beedrill. Gen 3 OU is a really cool metagame because even Pokemon that seem suboptimal or average can actually do surprisingly well if they just have a couple unique things to offer or have the appropriate support from teammates. But Beedrill never managed to do anything for me. It does have access to Baton Pass, which is a great move, and some pretty useful boosts it can pass to teammates, including Agility and Swords Dance. This is the first thing I tried, and it was extremely bad. Look at these stats, folks. How is Beedrill supposed to survive a hit from anything and successfully use a boosting move? The best defensive qualities it has are a times 4 fighting resistance and a poison immunity. The fighting resistance really isn't great when most fighting types are faster than you and run rock coverage. Poison immunity might be Beedrill's only avenue to get on the field successfully. You could maybe switch in on a Melodic that used Toxic and then sacrifice your entire existence just for a single agility pass. This is obviously far worse than other stat passes in the format. Zapdos, Scizor, and Ninjask are unsurprisingly better at this, and honestly even Girafarig is better. Ariados is probably better, folks. At least this has Insomnia, which lets it come in against sleep moves. It might sound far-fetched of me to say, but even Farfetch'd is superior here. At least Farfetch'd is immune to Spike's damage and ground type moves. Amazingly, I think even Leedian would be a better agility passer than Beedrill. It is also immune to Spike's ground and Dugtrio, and it has a massive special defense stat for some reason, along with the ability Early Bird, which is at least a little useful. And I'm gonna say something controversial here. I think even Ledyba is better than Beedrill at this. Ledyba is literally Leedian but worse, which is just about as bad as you get. But honestly, the stats aren't that different from Beedrill. You've got worse HP and defense, but the merits of flying typing and the utility of Early Bird might actually make up for that. So attempting to use Beedrill as a stat passer is probably not an option. What about as a physical attacker? Despite looking like it could deal some impressive physical damage to enemies, it can't. With a measly 80 base attack and 75 base speed, you're not posing much of a threat to anything. They also forgot to give Beedrill any attacks. Beedrill has the ability Swarm, which is what they give to bug types when they can't think of anything interesting. This is a pretty good ability in Gen 3. It's common for Pokemon to substitute down to the Swarm range and use that extra damage to power through teams. It's also common to just naturally get hit into that health range. Heracross is the best example of a Pokemon that uses Swarm to the fullest, but this ability really stinks on Beedrill. The best bug type move on this Pokemon is Hidden Power, which has an impressive base power of 70. Perishing in a single hit is way more common than getting hit into Swarm range on Beedrill. Even if you do manage to maneuver into range, you're dealing unimpressive damage for all that effort. Sludge Bomb is Beedrill's best physical stab option in Gen 3, but Poison's not a fantastic offensive type this gen. Steel is immune to Poison, and some of the most common Pokemon in the metagame are Skarmory and Metagross. Poison resists like Swampert and Flygon are also very common. The Bug plus Poison stab combo is completely resisted by Gengar too. And since you probably need to spend your Hidden Power on Bug to have a serviceable stab move, running Hidden Power Ghost for Gengar is going to be a huge sacrifice. The best a Choice Band Beedrill might do is land a surprise KO on Tyranitar with Brick Break, or invite in Skarmory, allowing you to Baton Pass to Magneton it cleanly. When comparing Beedrill with its Bug-type counterpart, Butterfree, it's not even close. Butterfree isn't the world's greatest Pokemon by any means, but for a Route 1 Bug-type that you wouldn't think has any competitive merit, it's actually not horrendous. Butterfree has access to Compound Eyes, which is a great ability, increasing the accuracy of your moves by 1.3 times. This makes both Sleep Powder and Stun Spore almost 100% accurate. Butterfree is the only Pokemon in Gen 3 with access to both an accurate sleep and paralysis inflicting move, apart from Smeargle. And you actually have a little bit of merit over Smeargle too, because Stun Spore hits ground types, and Smeargle doesn't have access to an accurate Stun Spore. Butterfree can also run no item and use Thief for item removal, and fill out the moveset with some random utility like Whirlwind or or Rain Dance. This is something you can work with. Butterfree has genuine, unique traits that aren't terrible, but it might be unfair to judge Beedrill by OU's standards. OU has a high power level, and Beedrill is clearly not designed to compete among the heavy hitters like Salamence and Tyranitar. Maybe Beedrill has some unique merit down in the lower tiers of Gen 3, is what I would say if I was an absolute buffoon. Down in Gen 3 ZU, Beedrill still struggles to function as a physical attack. It is at least kinda usable down here, where an 80 base attack can pose a decent threat to such metagame titans as Lileep and Castform. But Beedrill still finds itself outranked by its fellow bugs. Dustox is higher than Beedrill on the power rankings. Dustox is actually a decent special wall in ZU, with its access to Moonlight for reliable healing, the ability Shield Dust, which grants a useful immunity to the secondary effects of attacks, and Whirlwind to phase out enemies and cause a bit of disruption. Butterfree also clears Beedrill, much like it does up in OU, with its really useful utility. You could probably make Beedrill work in Gen 3 ZU, but I think it's hard to justify using this over the far superior Aipom, a faster and more immediately threatening physical attacker. Frankly, I would rather use Shuppet than Beedrill. Ghost typing can block Rapid Spin and Explosion and grant you entry points against normal and fighting type attacks, which is really useful. If you're finding yourself outclassed by Shuppet, I think you have a serious problem. In Gen 4, Beedrill at least became a little bit better. Beedrill actually managed to be less affected by the newly introduced Stealth Rock than a lot of its fellow mid-bug types. They gave Beedrill Toxic Spikes, which is useful utility. They also gave it some actual moves like X Scissor, U-Turn, and Physical Pursuit. The new edition of Focus Sash also allowed Beedrill to use Endeavor more effectively than it could in Gen 3. Beedrill also received one of the cooler Mega Evolutions in the Gen 6 games. The revamped visual design made our favorite Bee look a lot scarier and more imposing, and it had the stats to match. I think this is a cool Mega because it fits with what we all imagined Beedrill could do when we were kids. Adaptability is also a great offensive ability for this Pokemon, granting extra stab damage. Mega Beedrill wasn't quite good enough to be ranked in OU, probably because of Landorus Therian shutting it down easily. Rock Weakness is also never great, and since Mega Forms require that Mega Stone, there's very little set variety on this thing, making it quite predictable. It's hard to justify using your one Mega Evolution per team on Mega Beedrill in OU, but in UU this was a good Pokemon. Knockoff and Drill Run were good options for physical coverage, along with U-Turn for some powerful pivoting. In Gen 3, most of the early game bugs managed to actually stand out amongst themselves pretty well and serve some purpose in lower tiers, so I've always thought it was a shame that they didn't give Beedrill anything too distinct or interesting back in Gen 3. If I were to change Beedrill, I'd probably start by giving it a half-decent bug stab option as a signature move. You could probably just copy X Scissor from the later games and give it to Beedrill. I'd also give Beedrill a more useful ability. I think Limber would be a good fit, the ability that grants immunity to paralysis. Since fellow bug poison type Ariados has Insomnia, an ability that grants status immunity, makes sense. And paralysis immunity feels thematically appropriate on a Bee Pokemon. This would give Beedrill the slightest bit more defensive merit and would probably be worthwhile as a niche benefit in the lower tiers like ZU or NU. But what do you think of Beedrill? Who's your favorite early game bug type in the franchise? And what would you like me to talk about next? Let me know down below in the comments, and thank you for watching.